Hello again, welcome back to a new video. Today we're looking at the more affordable end of the range. If you watch YouTube regularly, you'll probably be offered videos by the sort of gods of film photography, people like George Munsey, Willem Verbeek and Kyle McDougall, Grainy Days, bad flashes, people that shoot Leicas and Pentax 6.7s and RZ67 seem to be incredibly popular as well. And these cameras, to me, are the price of a half decent car. But if you're just new to film photography, I don't suggest that you go out and buy these cameras unless you're particularly affluent. You can just start with a £20 or, I don't know, $30, probably even less than that, camera. You can always progress if you like it, and if you don't, you haven't lost too much money. To be honest, film photography is expensive. It always has been expensive. Film is really expensive, and then you've got the cost of developing it and getting it scanned. You can save some money by doing it yourself at home, but I wouldn't advise that for a first-time film shooter, really. Figure out whether you like it. It's not like digital where you can basically photograph everything that you want. But the interesting observation I see is that phone manufacturers now rely on the specification of their cameras to sell you a new phone rather than the actual specification of making phone calls or sending text messages, for example. So photography is still very, very important in the digital age. But if you decide you want to try out the alternative, the predecessor, which is still alive and kicking, by the way, and getting stronger every day, it's best not to invest too much money in case you don't like it. So on that theme, today we're looking at a camera from Germany, and this came from East Germany. After the Second World War, Germany was split into two. East Germany was part of the Soviet bloc, the USSR. Dresden, a city in Germany, was the main sort of base and headquarters for their optical industry. It was for years. A lot of people moved to Dresden because of the skill and experience there. There was quite a few camera manufacturing companies. This one came from a company called Pentacon, which was sort of an amalgamation of various other camera manufacturers that had been put under sort of one kind of roof. They sold cameras under the Praktica brand. And these were designed to be affordable to the average person in the Soviet Union. So in the western side of the world, Western Europe, the US and the rest of the world, these are very, very affordable. These, combined with the Zenith cameras, which came out of Moscow, KMZ I believe, were entry-level cameras or entry-level single-lens reflex cameras for a lot of people in the late 60s, early 70s. They were affordable, they're reliable, they're tough as old boots, they still work fine. They're affordable because so many of them were produced. They were sold in huge numbers, there's a lot of them about. They're not seen as very desirable. Unfortunately, I quite like them. I was aware of these from, I don't know, early 70s, I think. It's one of the first SLR cameras I saw as a Praktica. Anyway, this is the Super TL. This was introduced in 1968. Has a mechanical shutter. The Super TL normally means through the lens. And this camera does take a battery. It takes the old mercury cells, which are now banned, but you can get an adapter that you can fit in there with a newer cell, or use a wean cell, which is the battery that goes in a hearing aid, and they provide the right voltage, 1.35 volts, as opposed to the 1.5 volts you get from an SR44 battery. So you can see on the base we've got a battery compartment, a tripod bush which is slightly offset, which is a little bit irritating to me, but it shouldn't really be a problem in practice. We have two flash connections for PC cords here. We have an X for electronic flash, and the F is for bulbs. Bulbs were still around in the late 60s and early 70s. On this side we have a stop down lever, which is like a depth of field preview. It closes the iris down, you can see that inside there. It stops the lens down to the taking position. Whatever you set on the lens is the position that it will set it to. It also turns on the metering, so this camera has stop down through the lens metering, quite common at the time. On the top here, unusually for cameras but very common for Prakticas and Pentacon cameras in general, we have the front mounted shutter release. It's got the usual film wind on the top and it is quite loud, but it is a nice sound, I think. The lens on this is the wrong one, it's not from the same era, this is a later lens. You can see it's multi-coated. It's a 50mm 1.8 Pentacon Auto. I'm going to do a video about auto because auto is applied to everything to do with cameras. But in this case it doesn't mean autofocus or auto exposure. All it means simply is it's got a little pin on the back of it, and when the camera body pushes that pin, that closes the aperture blades down. Prior to the introduction of this pin, you'd have to focus and then close the aperture down manually and then take the picture and then open it up. It's very difficult to compose an image or a picture when your aperture is quite small. You'll be all right at 1.8, even 2.8, possibly even at f4. But once you start getting down into these bigger numbers, trying to compose and focus at f16, it's not an easy thing to do. M42 is the name of this mount. It's a screw mount. It's very cheap to produce, which is why it was so common. These were overtaken in the 70s really by bayonet mounts, and that came about because camera manufacturers needed a way to communicate what aperture you'd selected here back to the camera body, and the M42 as a standard never really had a solution to that problem, which is why the M42 mount kind of disappeared from the scene. The only thing M42 mounts normally have in common is this pin. So that's what the auto applies to in this case, is the operation of the aperture stop down mechanism. It's not autofocus, it's manual focus. You have to turn the lens, there isn't a motor to do it for you, and you have to use your eyes to gauge what bit you want to be in focus is in focus. It does focus quite close, this one. It's down to just over a foot. Quite a nice lens, but it's not of the period of this camera, it is from later on. So that's that lens. It does fit. You can see in there's a little bar that moves when you push the button, and that's what operates the pin. You can see there's a mirror, hence the reflex part. Eye level prism on top. The shutter release does have a lock on it, by the way. You can turn this that way and then the shutter release is locked. It also takes a threaded cable release, so you can use it on a tripod without getting any camera shake, well, apart from the mirror. There is no self-timer. It has depth of field preview, but there is no self-timer. But you can buy, I've got one, a little clockwork self-timer that sits on the top, and it's mechanical and it has a plunger that goes down in and triggers the camera that way. On the top we have the film advance, pretty standard. If you've seen any 35mm cameras, that'll be familiar to you. We have a frame counter window up here. This is an incremental one, so it counts the number of pictures you've taken, not the number of pictures you've got left. Unusually, the film rewind, which is usually on the bottom of these sort of cameras, is on the top. It's this button here, right next to the film advance. Next to that we have the shutter speed selector, and this one goes up to a 500th of a second and all the way down to 1 second plus B, and it does have a flash synchronization setting as well, which I suspect is probably a 45th or a 60th, because it's got a horizontal shutter built into it. It's a cloth horizontal shutter. Surrounding this dial, you'll see we have another dial which is showing ASA, read ISO figures, and DIN, the German standard, which you'll still find on films I think even today they still show what the DIN rating is. Everybody uses ISO now. And to set the film speed, you'll see there's an index marker. You can pull the shutter dial up and you can turn it so it lines up with the film setting that you want to choose. So you just change it by moving that. Excuse me. Selected shutter speed is lined up with that dot. It is mechanical, so the shutter will work without batteries. There's no battery in this, and the shutter's still working. It's already cocked. Very nice sounding cameras. This one's not in the best condition. It's had a bit of a bump and that. Rewind crank when you finish taking your 20, 36, or this is marked for 12. I don't think 12 exposure films are available anymore. This is what you use to rewind the film back into the cassette. And there is a little reminder tab here. You can see this is set to 36 for 36 exposures. It's got 20 on it, and this has got the 12 exposures. So you know how many exposures is on your film, you know how many you've taken. So do a bit of subtraction, you know how many you've got left. To open the back, unusually the back doesn't open on this side. I guess it's to try and make film loading a bit easier, but the back actually opens on this side over here. So there you can see the interior of it. These don't use degrading plastic foam as light seals. They use wool and rubber. So you shouldn't have any issues with light leaks with these. But if you do, it's simple enough to clean them up and replace them. Pressure plate. Fresh film goes in this side. Let's press the shutter again. This does go up to allow the film canister to go in. Pull it across guide rails. It has to sit behind this little bar here, so it lines up with these sprockets. And it's got quite an ingenious system. There isn't multi-slotted splines. When you try and advance the film, you'll see these springs grab the film and pull it into the centre. So it's kind of an early easy load system. And not having the door on this side, no, not opening on this side, does seem to make it gives you a lot more room here rather than trying to get in round the door, etc. It's quite well designed. So there you can see the shutter curtains. It's a miserable day today. There's no daylight at all. It's shocking. But yeah, there you can see the shutter curtains. You can see it's two curtains on a shutter. So you've got the first curtain and the second curtain. It doesn't actually travel any faster. It travels at the same speed, no matter what setting you use on it. It's only the width of the gap that changes. On a longer shutter speed, the gap will be wider. On a higher speed, the gap will be slower. So they do move at the same speed. It's the gap is the deciding factor. Mechanical cameras tended to top out about 1,000th of a second. When electronic shutters became available in the 70s, then you started seeing speeds like 2,000th, 4,000th, 8,000th. I think there was even a Canon that did 16,000th of a second, which is quite phenomenal. Electronic timing obviously was a lot better than the mechanical timing, but I just like the sound of the mechanical cameras. This one is missing a bit of trim down here by the look of it, but yeah, sturdy, quite hefty, not unreasonable, quite affordable. Good place to start. You'll learn the basics of exposure, which is a combination of ISO, shutter speed and aperture to make sure your film gets the right exposure. There is a needle in the viewfinder. It's a matched needle. It is what's called a coupled meter. That means the meter is connected to the shutter speed, and because it's stopped down, it's also semi-coupled to the aperture. So if you adjust the aperture or adjust the shutter speed, or the ISO for that matter, the needle will move up and down. So on this side, actually, inside. Up is overexposure, down is underexposure, and the circle is about right. Very, very good. Very, very basic. If you can master exposure correctly, that will be a big bonus in the world of film photography. It's something even automated cameras get wrong frequently. But yeah, great learning camera. Great for a student or somebody who's starting out, with the advantage of a huge amount of lenses available in M42, not only from Praktica but Yashica, Pentax, loads of third-party manufacturers, Miranda, Vivitar, the list is endless. M42 mount lenses, there's a lot of them about, so again they're very affordable, and there's some real quality ones in there. Some of the Pentaxes, the Super Tuckamores, they're still regarded as highly regarded lenses. So yeah, Praktica Super TL 1968. Yeah, nice, interesting little camera. There's a whole series of Prakticas which will be coming on the channel in the future. But yeah, that's the camera for today. Thank you for watching. Comments, questions, queries. No questions are too stupid. It can be a bit daunting, film photography. It's a whole new thing to learn. There's a lot of lingo to it. There's a lot of names for things. And yeah, comments, questions, queries down below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, all that usual YouTube stuff. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.